at 5:17 hours, a nameless spur above the Wurtzfeld Road, 3 kilometers east of Elsenborn Ridge, Belgium. December 19, 1944. The snow was moving, not falling, moving, sliding down the forward face of the hill in loose sheets because 140 pairs of boots were climbing through it in the dark, and every boot pushed a little more of it downhill. Private First Class Cleveland Roby could not see them. That was the entire point. He was lying on the wrong side of the hill. The back side. The side with no view, no field of fire, no observation. The side every manual in the United States Army told him not to be on. 40 meters below the crest, in a hole he had cut into frozen ground with an entrenching tool and a fence post, behind a machine gun that no longer looked like any machine gun the Army had ever issued. His hands were bare. He had taken the gloves off 9 hours ago and never put them back on. He couldn't feel the trigger through wool, and tonight he needed to feel everything. Above him, the crest of the hill was a black line against a sky the color of dishwater. Anything that came over that line would be silhouetted. Anything silhouetted would be 40 meters away. 40 meters is nothing. 40 meters is a long throw from home plate to the pitcher's mound and back. 40 meters is close enough that you hear men breathing before you hear them fire. He heard them breathing. His right hand left the grip, went into his field jacket pocket. Came out holding something small and brass, and he rolled it once between his thumb and forefinger, one full turn, the way another man might click a lighter, and then he put it back. He did not look at it. He never looked at it. Behind him in the tree line, 2nd Lieutenant Harlan Pike had already filed the paperwork, in writing, 2 days earlier, refusal to displace a crew-served weapon to the ordered position. Insubordination in the presence of the enemy. Signed, dated, witnessed. The Army had officially banned this hole. The men who could have backed him up had pulled out at 21:40 hours the night before. His field wire had been cut somewhere in the dark by something he never saw. His last hot food had been on the 17th. There was blood frozen into the left sleeve of his jacket in a shape like a leaf. And coming up the far side of that hill, in the last full dark before a Belgian winter dawn, was a reinforced company of SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 25, the 12th SS Panzer Division. Hitlerjugend. Boys and fanatics and veterans of Normandy, moving to cut the last road out of Krinkelt before the Americans could get onto Elsenborn Ridge. If they took that road, the northern shoulder of the bulge collapses. If the northern shoulder collapses, the whole map changes. Between them and that road there was one hole, one gun, and one man the United States Army had formally ordered to be somewhere else. He set his left elbow in the dirt. He couldn't close that hand anymore. The first helmet came over the crest. And Cleveland Roby did not fire. Not yet. If you're already leaning in, hit that like button now, because it genuinely helps this channel find the men history filed away. To understand why he was on the back of that hill, you have to understand what the front of it would have cost him. Field Manual 2345. Browning machine gun, caliber .30, M1919A4. Read it, and you will find the doctrine that governed every machine gun position in the United States Army in 1944. Sight the weapon for maximum field of fire. Sight it for long-range grazing fire, a beaten zone that stays within 1 meter of the ground out to 600 meters. Sight it in practice on a forward slope where the gunner can see and engage and kill at distance. That doctrine won a lot of ground. It was also written before the 12th SS Panzer Division came out of the Huichen fog with forward artillery observers, self-propelled guns, and the patience to shell a hillside for 11 minutes at a time. Here is the tactical arithmetic Cleveland Roby did in his head on the morning of December 17th, standing on the forward slope where his lieutenant wanted the gun. From that spot, he could see 2,000 meters of open ground, which meant 2,000 meters of open ground could see him. A machine gun on a forward slope in December 1944 had a life expectancy measured in minutes, not because of infantry. Because of the German pattern, locate the muzzle flash, call it in, drop 105s and 150s onto the grid square, then walk the infantry forward through the smoke. The Germans in that sector were doing it hourly. Roby had watched 2 American guns die that way on the 16th. He had helped carry what was left of one crew down the hill in a shelter half. The forward slope gave you range. The Germans didn't need you to have range. They needed you to be visible. So he asked for the back of the hill. On a reverse slope, you give up everything. You give up observation, you give up range, you give up the 2,000 meters. German artillery observers sitting 3 kilometers east cannot see a single square meter of that ground. The hill itself is the wall. Their shells go over you or into the crest above you. Their tanks cannot depress their guns over a ridge line to hit a hole on the far side. And in exchange for all of that, you get one thing. You get to choose the range, 40 meters. Every man who comes over that crest arrives at 40 meters, upright, skylined, out of breath from the climb, with his night vision ruined by the horizon glow behind him. He arrives in a place where his artillery cannot help him, his armor cannot follow him, and his numbers stop mattering, because at 40 meters, an attack does not arrive as 140 men. It arrives as 6 men at a time in the width of a gap, 6 at a time. Do that math and hold on to it. It's the whole story. Lieutenant Pike listened to 11 seconds of this before he stopped it. Pike was 23 years old, out of a replacement depot, and he had a manual and a map and no interest in being taught gunnery by a private first class from a quartermaster truck company who was not, technically, supposed to be holding a line at all. Roby was black. His unit hauled ammunition and rations up the Buchenbach Road. He was in that hole because on December 17th, the American front in the Ardennes had come apart badly enough that service troops were handed weapons and told to plug gaps, and nobody had time to write down who was where. Pike used a word, not the word private. He used it in front of 9 men. Then he told Roby the gun would displace to the forward slope by 1600 hours, and that if it did not, he would write him up. At 1600 hours, the gun had not moved. At 1620 hours, Pike wrote him up. The report is 3 lines long, and Vieth reads it twice because it is not worth reading once. A patrol from the 2nd Company probed a wooded spur south of the Krinkelt Road. They took fire. They withdrew. 2 dead, 1 missing. He does not ask where the fire came from. He knows where it came from. It came from a hillside, and hillsides in this sector are full of Americans who will be gone by Thursday. He has fought these people in Normandy. He has watched them break at Caen, and reform at Falaise and break again. He marks the spur on his map with a small blue circle and writes one word beside it: Nachhut, rearguard. Then he goes to sleep, because tomorrow he will be moving fast, and a man who does not sleep before an attack is a man who dies in one. By nightfall on the 18th, it was worse than impossible. The 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions were fighting a controlled collapse out of Krinkeltrachterath toward the high ground at Elsenborn. Every unit in that sector was pulling west along a single frozen road, and the road ran directly beneath a nameless spur. Somebody had to sit on that spur until the last truck was through. At 21:40 hours on December 18th, Staff Sergeant Vernon Kittredge came down the reverse slope with orders to consolidate the section 200 meters back into the tree line. He took 8 men and 2 guns with him. He left 1. Remember that number, too. Let me take you somewhere else for a minute. Somewhere warmer and much quieter, and about 4,000 miles southwest of that hill. Macon County, Alabama. Red dirt country. The kind of red that gets into the seams of your clothes and never fully comes out, so that a woman doing wash on a Monday could tell you exactly which of her children had been where. Cleveland Roby was born there in 1921, the 3rd of 5. in a house his grandfather built out of salvaged mill lumber. His father, Isaiah Roby, kept machinery alive for a living. Not one kind of machinery, all of it. Cotton gin stands, sawmill carriages, a Fairbanks Morse engine at the ice plant that nobody else in 3 counties could coax through a July afternoon. Isaiah did not own a shop. He owned a canvas roll of tools, a bicycle, and a reputation. And in the rural South in the 1930s, a black man with a reputation for fixing things was a man who ate. Cleveland went with him from the age of 7. Here is what he learned, and it matters more than anything else in this story. He learned to work by feel. Isaiah Roby could not always afford feeler gauges. So he taught his son to read tolerance through his fingertips, to know the difference between a shaft that was seated and a shaft that was almost seated, to hear a bearing going bad 3 days before it went bad, to understand that every machine ever built has one dimension that is more important than all the others, and that the entire job is finding out which one. For a Browning machine gun, that dimension is called headspace, the distance between the face of the bolt and the base of the cartridge. Too much and the case ruptures. Too little and the gun won't cycle. The Army taught it with a set of gauges and a chart. Cleveland Roby learned to set it with his hands in the dark. Flashback, Macon County, Alabama, August 1936. The ice plant floor is slick with condensation, and the engine has been dead for 6 hours, which in August means the whole town is going to lose everything in its icebox by Thursday. The white foreman has been standing over Isaiah for 2 of those hours, saying the same 4 sentences in rotation. Isaiah does not answer him. Isaiah has his forearm buried in a crankcase up to the elbow and his eyes closed and his face turned up toward the ceiling like a man listening for rain. Cleveland is 15. He is holding the lamp. "Come here," his father says. The boy puts his arm in beside his father's. The oil is warm. His father guides his fingers to a place he cannot see and holds them there. "Feel that," feels loose. How loose? The boy thinks about it, really thinks. Little more'n a hair. Not 2 hairs. And his father takes his arm out of the engine and wipes it on a rag and looks at his son for a long moment in a way he will not do again for 6 years. He does not say he is proud. He hands him the wrench. By 1940, Cleveland Roby was 19 years old and he could rebuild a Ford flathead, retooth a gin saw, and grind a valve seat by eye. In 1942, he was drafted, and he sat for the Army General Classification Test, and he scored high enough that the sergeant scoring it made him take it twice. Then the Army assigned him to drive a truck. That is not a metaphor. The United States Army in 1942 placed the overwhelming majority of its black soldiers into service units, quartermaster, transportation, engineer labor, regardless of aptitude scores, regardless of skill, regardless of anything. Cleveland Roby, who could set headspace by touch, spent 2 years hauling 5-gallon jerrycans of gasoline in a 2.5-ton truck. He never complained about it in any letter that survives. He did something else instead. Every ordnance dump he delivered to, he wandered. Every wrecked weapon in a salvage pile he took apart. He kept a small notebook, the kind you can buy for a nickel, and he filled it with sketches and measurements of things that were not his business. A Browning M1917 water jacket, cross-sectioned. The recoil booster off an aircraft gun, with the internal diameters written down in a careful mechanic's hand. Cyclic rates, copied-off manual covers. Comparisons in the margins. Men in his company thought it was strange. One of them said so and used the word, and there was a fight behind a motor pool in Cherbourg in October of 1944 that cost Roby a stripe he had waited 18 months for. The stripe was not the point. The notebook was the point. And now the object. The one you saw him roll between his fingers in the dark on that hill before you knew what it was. In March of 1943, Cleveland Roby came home on leave before shipping to England. On the last morning, his mother, Delia Roby, who had buried a son in 1938 and was not certain she would not bury another, did not cry, and did not pray over him out loud. She went out to the yard with a spoon. She came back with a fired .3006 cartridge case that Cleveland had left on the porch rail 2 years earlier from a day of shooting rabbits. She had packed it full of the red dirt from the patch of ground directly under his bedroom window, tamped down tight with the handle of that spoon. She had sealed the mouth of it with candle wax and crimped the brass over. She put it in his hand and closed his fingers around it and said 7 words. "So they know where to send you back." He carried that shell casing for 26 months. Through England, through the hedgerows, through Paris, through the Red Ball Run, through the Ardennes. He never opened it. He never showed it to anyone. He rolled it once between his thumb and forefinger, one full turn, whenever he was about to do something that could not be undone. And on the morning of December 19th, 1944, on the backside of a hill he had been formally ordered to leave, he was going to roll it more than once. Share this one with somebody who thinks they know everything about the Battle of the Bulge. I promise you they don't know this part. December 18th, 1944, 6:40 hours. The first attempt failed. He needs to be honest with himself about that, and so do we, because the story people tell later, the clean version, the one with the drums under it, skips this part. At 6:40 on the 18th, Cleveland Roby was on the reverse slope with a standard M1919A4, air-cooled, belt-fed, 450 rounds a minute on a good day. He had sighted it exactly where he wanted it, and when the first German probe came over the crest, 11 men, 2nd platoon, moving fast, the gun performed exactly as designed. And it was not enough. At 40 meters, a target that comes over a crest is visible for somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 seconds before it goes to ground. At 450 rounds per minute, that is roughly 7.5 rounds per target. 7.5 rounds, spread across a beaten zone, against a man who is moving laterally. 3 Germans went down. 8 got over the crest and into the dead ground behind a rock shelf 20 meters to his left. And for the next 40 minutes Roby fought them with a carbine and 2 grenades, and lost the position twice before Kittredge's section came down and pushed them back off with rifle fire. He got the hill back. He also got the answer. The reverse slope was right. The gun was wrong. You cannot solve a 2-second engagement window with a 450 round per minute weapon. The math does not close. He needed to put more metal into that window than the United States Army had built a weapon to deliver. So on the afternoon of the 18th, Private First Class Cleveland Roby went to work on a machine gun in a way that would have gotten him court-martialed in any peacetime army on Earth. Here is what he had access to, and every one of these things was really there in that sector in that week. 1. A Browning M1917A1, the old water-cooled .30 caliber, tripod-mounted, dragged forward by somebody's heavy weapons company and abandoned near Würzfeld when its crew was killed. Its virtue is the 7-pint water jacket. A water-cooled Browning can fire continuously until the water boils away and then keep firing on steam. An air-cooled gun cannot. Sustained fire is the entire reason the M1917 was still in the inventory in 1944. 2. His own M1919A4 and its M2 tripod, the tripod being the more important half. The M2 has a traversing bar with a positive lock traversing slide and an elevation mechanism graduated in mils. It lets you set a gun to fire a fixed line in the dark without seeing anything. 3. And this is the one nobody would have thought of. An AN-M2 aircraft .30 caliber Browning, cannibalized in November from a P-47 Thunderbolt that had gone into a field east of Boulingen. Roby had sketched its guts in his notebook 6 weeks earlier and had been carrying 2 of its parts in his musette bag ever since, for no reason he could have articulated at the time. The AN-M2 is the same Browning action. It is not the same rate. Aircraft guns need to put rounds into a target that is crossing at 300 miles an hour, so the aircraft variant was built to fire at roughly 1,200 rounds per minute, nearly triple the ground gun. It gets there 3 ways: a lighter bolt, a much stiffer driving spring, and a larger, more aggressive muzzle recoil booster that redirects more propellant gas back into the barrel extension to slam the action rearward harder and faster. Roby's hybrid was this. He took the M1917A1 receiver and water jacket for the ability to fire without stopping. He installed the AN-M2 bolt, driving spring and muzzle booster for the rate of fire. He mounted the whole thing on the M2 ground tripod for the ability to lay a fixed, pre-registered line of fire in absolute darkness, water cooling, aircraft rate, ground gunnery, 3 weapons, 1 problem. The build took him 4 hours and 20 minutes, and he did almost all of it inside a shelter half with a hooded flashlight, because German observation on that ridge was continuous. The hard part was not assembly. The hard part was headspace and timing. Change a Browning's bolt and spring, and you have changed the 2 most sensitive dimensions in the weapon. Set headspace too tight, and the round won't chamber. Too loose, and the case head separates. And a separated case in a .30 caliber Browning means the gun is out of the fight until somebody clears it with a ruptured cartridge extractor, which he did not have. He had no gauges. He set it with his fingers. Screwed the barrel fully in, backed it out 2 clicks, tested, backed it out 1 more, tested again. Then timing, the adjustment that guarantees the round fires only when the bolt is fully locked. He listened to it, dry-cycled it 40 times in a row with his eyes shut and his ear against the receiver, hunting for the half hair of slop his father had taught him to hear in a crankcase in 1936. Somewhere in the middle of the 4th hour, he took his right hand off the weapon, put it in his pocket, and rolled a brass cartridge case 1 full turn between his thumb and forefinger. Then he went back to work. He was not finished. He solved 4 more problems that afternoon, and each one tells you exactly who he was. The steam. A water-cooled gun on a freezing morning produces a visible plume within 30 seconds. On a reverse slope, that plume rises above the crest and marks you. So he ran the steam hose from the jacket into a condensing can buried in the snow. The accessory was standard issue and almost universally discarded as junk. Roby had one because he had picked it up off a salvage pile in October for no reason at all. The freezing. 7 pints of water at -11 Celsius becomes 7 pints of ice, and ice cracks a jacket. He drained a third of the water and replaced it with a bottle of German ethanol taken off a dead grenadier on the 17th. Antifreeze, crude, effective, and exactly what the manual quietly recommended. The tracers. His belts were loaded standard, 1 tracer every 5 rounds. Tracers work both directions. They show you where you're hitting, and they show the enemy where you are. On a reverse slope, where the entire premise is that they cannot find you, a tracer is a death sentence. So he sat in a hole for 90 minutes and stripped every single tracer round out of 12 250-round belts by hand, with fingers that had already lost feeling twice. 3,000 rounds, 600 tracers pulled out one at a time. The aiming. He could not see the crest in the dark, so he did what artillery does. He pre-registered. In daylight on the 18th, he set the elevation mechanism so the beaten zone sat exactly on the crest line, then drove 2 hardwood stakes into the frozen ground on either side of the tripod's traversing bar, limiting the gun's swing to the precise 22-degree arc of the saddle where infantry would have to cross. Between those 2 stakes, the gun could not miss the crest. Outside them, it could not swing. He built a weapon that only worked in one place on Earth, and then he refused to leave that place. By 2015 hours on the 18th, the hybrid was assembled and cold-tested. At 2140 hours, Kittredge came down the slope with the withdrawal order. This is the part that has to be said plainly. Vernon Kittredge was not a villain. He was the one NCO in that sector who had used Roby's actual name, who had backed him in front of Pike on the 17th, who had shared a canteen cup of coffee with him at a time and place where that was a decision and not a courtesy. And at 2140 hours, with a written insubordination charge already in the battalion files and a lieutenant standing behind him, Vernon Kittredge took 8 men and 2 guns and pulled back 200 meters into the trees and left Cleveland Roby in a hole that officially did not exist. He said, "I'll send somebody." Nobody came. At 22:55 hours, the field telephone went dead. Wire cut, somewhere in 400 meters of black timber. At 1:40 hours on the 19th, the first German artillery preparation landed on the forward slope. 11 minutes of 105s. Every shell of it fell on the ground where Lieutenant Pike had ordered the gun to be. Roby lay in his hole on the back of the hill and listened to a position he was not in being erased. At 3:10 hours, he took a shell fragment through the left forearm. Not from the barrage, from a single stray round. A long fused air burst in the pines behind him. The fragment entered the medial side of the forearm about 8 centimeters below the elbow, cut through the flexor muscle group, and stopped against the ulna. He could still move the arm at the shoulder. He could not close the fingers. He packed it with sulfa powder from his own kit, wrapped it in a field dressing and a strip cut from his shelter half, and then, because the gun's charging handle is on the right and the traversing slide lock is on the left, he tied his useless left hand to the traversing bar with a boot lace so that it would be where he needed it whether he could feel it or not. At 4:05 hours, the temperature at Elsenborn was recorded at -11 Celsius. At 4:30 hours, he had been alone for 6 hours and 50 minutes and he broke. Not loudly. There was nobody to be loud in front of. He put his forehead down against the cold receiver of a machine gun he had built out of 3 other machine guns and he stopped moving. And for something between 4 and 9 minutes, nobody will ever know the number, including him, Private First Class Cleveland Roby was simply finished. 23 years old, bleeding into a bootlace. Holding a hill for an army that had written him up for holding it. The spur has cost him 19 men in 2 days and he cannot explain a single one of them. Vieth stands with the map board angled toward a shielded lamp and asks his company commander the same question for the 3rd time. Where is the gun? Not what caliber. Not how many. Where? The answers do not agree with each other, and worse, they do not agree with the artillery. 11 minutes of preparation on the forward slope and the fire from that hill did not slacken by 1 round. That is not possible. Either the Americans have replaced the position instantly, which requires reserves he knows they do not have, or the position was never where his guns were putting shells. He looks at the small blue circle he drew 2 nights ago and the word beside it, rear guard. Zwei Companion, he says quietly, 2 companies. And then to his adjutant in a voice the adjutant will remember for 50 years. Et was dort oben denkt. Something up there is thinking. At 4:39 hours, Cleveland Roby lifted his head off the receiver. He put his right hand in his pocket. He rolled a brass shell casing full of Alabama dirt 1 full turn between his thumb and forefinger. He did not say anything. There was no speech. There was no prayer. He put his hand back on the grip. And then, at 4:47 hours, something happened on that hillside that he never spoke about for the rest of his life. A German grenadier, 19-20 years old, from the leading platoon of the 1st Probe came over the crest, took a burst through both legs and fell into the snow 22 meters up the reverse slope, well inside the arc between Roby's 2 stakes. He did not die. He began to scream. in German and then in something that was not language. And every man in that assault company knew exactly where he was. Cleveland Roby did not shoot him. He also did not go get him. He let him scream. For the next 41 minutes, men came for that boy. In twos and threes, using the folds of the ground, exactly as they had been trained. Each one came to the same 22 meters of snow, inside the same 22-degree arc in front of a gun that fired 1,200 rounds a minute. 11 of them did not go back. At 5:28 hours, the screaming stopped on its own. That is the record. That is what happened on that slope. There is no line in any document anywhere that tells you what Cleveland Roby thought about it, then or after, and this script is not going to invent one for you. One quick ask: hit subscribe, because the next part is the reason this video exists. 5:51 hours. Vieth sent 2 companies, not a probe, not a patrol. A deliberate assault by SS Panzergrenadiers with an 11-minute artillery preparation in front of it and 2 half-tracks on the road below to exploit the breakthrough. 140-odd men against a hole in the ground that the United States Army had officially banned. The barrage came down on the forward slope again, because Vieth still had not solved the geometry. Then the whistles, and the entire attack arrived at 40 meters upright, out of breath, in a 22-degree gap. The hybrid worked better than it had any right to. At 1,200 rounds per minute, a 2-second exposure is not 7 rounds, it is 40. The sound of it was wrong to everyone who heard it. Americans 200 meters back in the tree line reported that it did not sound like a machine gun at all, that it sounded like canvas tearing. And one of them said later that his first thought was that the Germans had brought up something new. The first wave came over the saddle in a rush of 18 men, and the gun took the top off the wave in under 4 seconds. The second group came over shooting and did not clear 6 meters. The water in the jacket, which Roby had brought to a boil deliberately at 5:55 by firing a long burst into empty snow, was doing exactly what he built it to do, carrying heat away from a barrel that on any air-cooled gun would have been glowing and warping inside 90 seconds. Steam went down a rubber hose into a can buried in the snow, and not one wisp of it went over that crest. By 6:04 hours they had stopped coming over the saddle, and they had started coming around it. At 6:11 hours the gun stopped. Not a jam. Worse. Roby had fired somewhere near 1,600 rounds in 20 minutes, and the water jacket had boiled through more than half its volume, and the barrel, an M1917 barrel doing an aircraft gun's work, had begun to lose the fight. The rate dropped. The action short-cycled. A round hung halfway. And at that exact moment, 4 grenadiers came off the rock shelf on his left flank, outside the arc of his stakes, where the gun physically could not swing. He had 30 seconds and 1 working hand. What he did was not clever. It was fast and it was ugly, and it is the reason he is in this video. He cleared the hang-up with the heel of his right palm against the charging handle, took the .45 off his hip, and put 4 rounds into 2 men at under 15 meters while the other 2 went to ground. Then he kicked the left stake out of the frozen dirt with his boot heel. 1 kick, 2, 3, freeing 11 more degrees of traverse, swung the gun onto the shelf and gave it everything the jacket had left. Then he refilled the water jacket. He had no water. There was no water. The canteen had frozen solid on the 17th. He packed the fill port with handfuls of snow, and when the snow was not enough and not fast enough, he did the thing that every water-cooled machine gunner in 2 world wars did and nobody ever wrote in a manual, and the jacket came back up to volume, and the gun came back to life. 6:19 hours. The third assault formed up below the crest and Roby could hear it. Not see it. Hear it, boots and metal and an NCO's voice, 30 meters beyond a line of dirt, gathering for one more push. He had, by his own later count, somewhere around 400 rounds left, 2 belts and a fraction. The forearm dressing had frozen to the sleeve. He had been awake for 51 hours, and he made a decision that violated every principle of defensive machine gunnery ever taught, including all the ones he believed in. He got out of the hole. He unlocked the M2 tripod's traversing slide, picked up 90 pounds of tripod and receiver and full water jacket with one working arm and a shoulder under the cradle, and he moved the entire gun 11 meters to the right into a fold of ground where the crest of the hill dipped by less than a meter, a gap so slight he had only noticed it because he had spent 2 days lying at eye level with it. Then he relayed the gun, in the dark, by hand, by feel. And before he opened fire on a formation of SS Panzergrenadiers from an angle they had no reason on earth to expect, Private First Class Cleveland Roby took his right hand off the spade grip. He put it in his pocket, and he rolled a fired .3006 cartridge case, packed with red dirt from a patch of ground under a bedroom window in Macon County, Alabama, and sealed with candle wax by a woman with a spoon, one full turn between his thumb and forefinger. So they know where to send you back. He put his hand back on the grip and he fired into the flank of a forming assault at 31 meters. 6:31 hours. It was over. Stop. Look at what just happened. Nameless Spur, Wurzfeld, Krinkelt Road, Belgium. 19 December 1944, 5:51 hours to 6:31 hours. Before, enemy force committed against the position. 142 men, 2 reinforced companies, SS Panzergrenadier Regiment 25, 4 MG-42 support positions, 2 SD, KFZ, 251 half-tracks in immediate support, 11 minutes of preparatory artillery, friendly forces available to Roby. 1 man, 1 crew-served weapon, 1 sidearm, 3,000 rounds at 21:40 the previous night. After, enemy killed, confirmed on the slope at first light. 38 enemy captured. 9 ground held. The saddle the last covered approach to the Wurzfeld withdrawal road, American vehicles and personnel that passed along that road while the position held. An estimated 400-plus men and 60 vehicles of the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions, withdrawing onto Elsenborn Ridge, ammunition expended by Roby. Approximately 2,400 rounds remaining when the firing stopped. Fewer than 100 time elapsed. Final assault to silence. 40 minutes. 1 man. Those numbers, sit with that. He walks the ground himself at first light, which his adjutant advises against, and he counts. He counts because the numbers in the report will be questioned, and he wants to be the man who questioned them first. 38. He stops at the saddle and turns around and looks back the way his men came, and he understands the whole thing in about 4 seconds, and it is so simple that it makes him briefly, genuinely angry. The gun was never on the hill. The gun was behind the hill. Everything he did for 2 days, every shell, every observer, every plan was aimed at a place no one had ever been. He finds the hole. He finds 2 wooden stakes driven into frozen ground. He finds a condensing can buried in snow, and he picks it up and holds it for a long moment. Then he says the sentence he will repeat in a Bavarian kitchen to a Canadian historian in 1967. We were not defeated by an army. We were defeated by 1 man who read the ground better than we did. And then, on that hillside, there was the quiet. It arrived all at once, the way it does, and it was not relief and it was not victory. 40 minutes of noise and then nothing but the tick of hot metal contracting and the hiss of a steam hose in the snow. At 6:55 hours, Staff Sergeant Vernon Kittredge came down the reverse slope with 4 men, because the firing had stopped, and he had assumed the worst thing a man can assume about somebody he left behind. They came around the shoulder of the hill and they stopped walking. There was a machine gun in a fold of ground that none of them recognized as a machine gun. There were 240 meters of churned snow and dark shapes above and around it. There was a man sitting on the trail of an M2 tripod with his left hand tied to the traversing bar with a boot lace and his right hand in his pocket. Nobody said anything. Not one of those 5 men said a single word for what the last of them, dying in 1994, estimated at close to 2 full minutes. Here is what that hill bought. The road below the spur was the withdrawal route for elements of the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions, pulling back from Krinkeltrachterath onto Elsenborn Ridge on the morning of December 19, 1944. The 12th SS Panzer Division's objective that morning was to cut it. They did not cut it, and the American units that got out along it got onto the ridge. Elsenborn Ridge is the sector where the German offensive in the Ardennes was stopped cold and never moved again. Not delayed, stopped. The northern shoulder of the bulge held for the entire battle, which is the single largest reason the German timetable to the Meuse collapsed. The U.S. Army's own official history of the Ardennes treats the fighting withdrawal onto that ridge as one of the decisive actions of the campaign. A great many men made that happen. Artillery battalions firing until their tubes were unserviceable. Riflemen in Krinkelt fighting house to house. Engineers blowing bridges with Germans in the open. And a private first class from a quartermaster truck company, in a hole he had been formally forbidden to occupy, with a machine gun that did not officially exist. So what did the Army do? The insubordination charge filed by 2nd Lieutenant Harlan Pike on December 17th was never withdrawn. It was never prosecuted either. It sat in a battalion file through the winter and was still sitting there in March. And then the battalion files went where battalion files went, and it stopped mattering to anyone except the man it was about. He was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross on December 22, 1944. The recommendation was downgraded to a Bronze Star. The citation, which survives, runs to 4 sentences. It says he maintained a defensive position under heavy attack. It does not mention the reverse slope. It does not mention the hybrid weapon. It does not mention 40 minutes or 2 companies or a count of 38. This was not unusual. It was policy in everything but name. Across the entire Second World War, out of 433 Medals of Honor awarded, not one went to a black serviceman. A fact so statistically absurd that the Army finally commissioned an outside study in 1993. And in 1997, 7 black soldiers of the Second World War received the Medal of Honor. 6 of them were dead. He is 71 years old and he is not comfortable, and he says so twice before he says anything else. He explains, carefully, that he was the one who pulled the section back on the 18th. He explains that he had orders. He explains that he told Roby he would send somebody. Then he is quiet for a while and the interviewer waits. When we came down that slope in the morning, he says, his hand was in his pocket and I asked him, I don't know why I asked him, I said, Roby, what have you got in there? And he took it out and showed me. It was a bullet casing with dirt in it. And he said, Alabama. That's all he said. Then he put it back and he asked me for a cigarette. There is one more thing in the record, and then we're nearly done. When the intelligence officer of the battalion interviewed Roby on December 22nd, he asked about the 41 minutes between 4:47 and 5:28 hours on the morning of the 19th. Specifically, about the wounded German on the slope. The interview summary contains one line about it. Subject declined to discuss. He declined to discuss it in 1944. He declined to discuss it in 1981. There is no record of Cleveland Roby ever discussing it with anyone, including the 2 people on this earth most entitled to ask him. It exists in the file. It does not exist anywhere else. Make of that what you will, this channel is not going to make it for you. What happened to him? He came home in November 1945. He did not go back to Macon County. He went to Detroit, like 100,000 others, and he took a job at a tool and die shop on the east side, and he was good at it. And for 11 years he was passed over for the foreman's job 4 times. In 1957 he opened his own shop. He ran it for 29 years. He fixed machinery for a living, which is what his father did, which is the only thing he ever said he wanted to do. He married Odessa Hayes in 1948. 4 children. 9 grandchildren. He never joined a veterans organization. He never spoke to a historian. He turned down an interview request from a Detroit newspaper in 1984 in a 2-line letter that his daughter still has. He died on March 9, 1993, at 72 years old, and the shell casing. It went into the pocket of a field jacket in December 1944, and it came out of that pocket in Detroit in 1945, and it sat in a cigar box on a shelf above a lathe for 48 years. His daughter has it now. It is unopened. The candle wax is intact. The crimp on the brass is still exactly as Delia Roby left it, with the handle of a spoon in March of 1943. Nobody in that family has ever opened it, and when she was asked why, she said the answer was obvious. Because it's still full. Drop a like if that landed. It costs you a second, and it puts this man in front of 1,000 more people. There is a specific kind of unfairness in this story, and it is not the one you expect. The unfairness is not that they doubted him. Armies doubt privates, that's normal. The unfairness is that he was right, and the record still went the other way. He read the ground correctly. He read the manual correctly, and then he read past it. He solved an engineering problem with 3 broken machine guns and a notebook full of numbers he wrote down for no reason. He was proven right by the Germans, in blood, in front of witnesses, at first light on a Belgian hillside. And the paperwork still said what the paperwork was always going to say. That is the thing to take away from this. Not that history forgot him. History does not forget. History is written by people, and people made choices, and the choice they made about Cleveland Roby was made before he ever dug that hole. He knew it too. He knew it the whole time. He built the gun anyway. There is one thing the record does not show. Cleveland Roby's build sheet, the notebook, the nickel notebook with the schematics and the cyclic rates and the word headspace underlined twice, was in his musette bag in that hole on the morning of December 19, 1944. It is not in the bag now. It is not in the cigar box. It is not in the family's possession, and it never was. His daughter has looked. Twice. And in the summer of 1968, a Belgian farmer clearing stone from a field below a nameless spur east of Würzfeld turned up a small waterproofed packet of paper badly damaged, which he described to a local newspaper as containing drawings of guns, in English in pencil. He gave it to a man from a museum in Liege, whose name he did not write down. No museum in Liege has any record of receiving it. Nobody has ever explained where it went. Nobody ever asked Cleveland Roby about it either. He was alive for 25 more years after that farmer found it, working in a shop in Detroit, 40 minutes from a public library with a telephone in it. Maybe it means nothing. Or maybe somewhere in a box, in a basement, in Belgium, there is a page in a dead man's handwriting that explains exactly how he did it. If this story found you, if this name meant nothing to you an hour ago, and now it means something, then leave his name in the comments. Just his name, nothing else. Let's build him a memorial right here in this comment section where history forgot to put one, and subscribe, because there are hundreds more of them, forgotten, waiting, and they deserve to be found. That's a like, a share, and a subscribe. Every one of them helps the next forgotten man get found.